Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everything Iconic with me, Danny Pellegrino. I'm here with a legend, a horror movie legend, Robert Englund. Of course, we know you as Freddy Krueger himself. It is the anniversary of the original Nightmare on Elm Street. It's also the 30th anniversary of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which I'd love to ask you about. But first of all, Robert, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. And I just realized it's the 30th anniversary of the New Nightmare because that was 94 and we were 84. Yeah.
Right. It's a big year. Are you, when you first hear the word a new nightmare being 30 years, what do you think about when that comes up?
Well, the thing, it's incredible, but it's a little easier to handle because I did Freddy versus Jason in 2004, which is only 20 years ago. So it makes it a little, because we had a long run with the sort of Nightmare on Elm Street franchise and the adjacent films. But I walked in my hotel room last night. I'm at home now in my office, but I walked into the hotel room last night. I was doing a local talk show, and on AMC was, I think it might have been a digitally remastered, but I had this huge screen, way bigger than the one I have at home. And it was Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So it was fun. I haven't seen it in a long time, and I watched it again last night. And boy, is Heather good in that. She's like in every scene, she's really got to hold down that movie. I just get to come and go as Uber Freddy, I'm like,
I wonder,
new improved makeup.
I just watched it again last night too, just because I knew I was talking to you. I was excited to see it, and it was struck by how meta it was and how sort of ahead of its time it felt. Because of course that led into Scream a couple years later, and sort of this meta take on horror.
Danny, the release of Scream, which is also Wes Craven, the second or the third phase of his influence on horror movies after obviously the Nightmare franchise, and before that, people don't forget Last House on the Left, Hills Have Eyes, and one of my favorites, The Serpent and the Rainbow. But yes, part 7, The New Nightmare, is meta, and we made it for the fans. And it deals with our guilt as successful actors and directors and producers. I'm going to sneeze. It deals with our guilt about, making our profit and having our fame off of serial killer, as it were. And what if his essence, the evil essence of that serial killer, infected us, just like Freddy infected the Elm Street brats. But there could have been, there would not have been the success of Wes Craven's New Nightmare had not he gone on to do the Scream films, because the Scream films were a bigger hit, and they kind of taught audiences how to go back and rewatch Wes Craven's New Nightmare, when it came out on DVD and stuff. It was after its theatrical release. And the Scream films, or the first Scream movie, was much more palatable and gave the horror audiences and the audiences a little easier avenue into its sort of meta movie within a movie within a movie. And as Wes used to say, we know that what we're going to do to scare you, but we're going to get you anyway. But we're going to tell you we're going to tell you what we know that and then we're still going to get you again.
Yeah. I mean, just brilliant. And I think that movie holds up so well too. I know we're here to talk about the original, which is of course iconic, legendary, fantastic. But I encourage everyone who's a fan of the franchise to go back and watch New Nightmare, because I think it was so many ways ahead of its time.
And it's not that it's neglected; it is quite successful now. But it really holds up, and it can be viewed more than once, because there's lots of little, Easter eggs in it. Even I'm not sure if we used that word back then, but there are some little hidden things in it. And I mean, I'll give you an example of one. Just keep an eye on Heather Langenkamp's wardrobe when she leaves as Heather after the earthquake from her home to go visit her husband on the set of a Wes Craven movie where he's doing props, including the claw. Just watch it very carefully, and you'll kind of see the subtleties with which the nightmares begin in that film.
Oh no, I got to go back and watch it again. Fantastic. Now, you mentioned sort of wrestling, you and wrestling with this idea of bringing the serial killer into pop culture. And how do you feel about that now, even looking back on it? Has your opinion changed?
I'm actually a huge fan of true crime stuff, and I love Dahmer, and I loved Silence of the Lambs, and I loved it. I loved Hannibal, the television show with Mads Mikkelsen, and I recently saw David Tennant, who, among other things, did Broadchurch and Doctor Who. And I saw him on the West End in an incredible play about the Good German, the so-called Good German during World War II in Nazi Germany. But he has, I think it's about 4 years old, an English serial killer, true crime show. I think it's 4 hours maybe, called Des, Des, which is the way the Brits call, or the Scots say Dennis. Des. It's just the nickname for Dennis. And it's extraordinary. And David Tennant, I mean, he's up there with Daniel Day-Lewis and that quality of work.
Right.
It's just, and the wonderful actor who did Dahmer, who's so versatile, and Anthony Hopkins, one of my favorites. So I'm such a fan of it. It's hard for me to like separate my fanboy love of true crime from any kind of potential guilt I might have having, been successful, as a horror actor. I'm just grateful because the big lesson for me, and this is a selfish lesson learned, they don't teach you this in drama school or in acting classes, but I became an international actor as a result of a science fiction show and as a result of a horror movie, which is just a great thing to elongate one's career. And when you get to be my age, it's really fun to be invited to go to Barcelona or Rome or somewhere to do a movie. You get extra brownie points with the old lady.
Sure. And I mean, getting to appear in things like Stranger Things, and it feels like so much of your work in the Nightmare franchise snowballed into a lot of other cool opportunities.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a character actor, and I'd done probably a dozen movies before I did Nightmare, and I was established in Hollywood, which is another great happy accident of my career, because had I not done a lot of other stuff, just broke with Just Freddy, I might be singing a different tune now. But because I was already established, I'd already had a hit series, and I'd done a dozen movies, and I'd starred in half a dozen of those movies, and I'd worked with literally a couple of the greatest actors in the history of film. I mean, I starred in a movie with Henry Fonda, who's arguably, along with Brando and Jimmy Stewart, a couple of others, our greatest actor on film. And I worked with, in a TV movie of all things, with Lillian Gish, which gives me a kind of 6 degrees of separation all the way back to Charlie Chaplin and silent films. So I had that kind of cachet in Hollywood, working with Susan Sarandon and Jeff Bridges and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Barbara Streisand. I had a bit of cachet, and I think that fact kept me pretty sane and actually helped me relax along about Nightmare on Elm Street 3, when I really decided, they want me to go over to Europe and do low budget Vincent Price roles. Well, I'm going to. Nobody else is filling those shoes, and I like it. And Rest taught me to respect the genre, or to at least remember how much I loved it as a child. I was a fanboy myself as a child in the 1950s, and Wes sort of reminded me of that, and sort of taught me to respect the genre. I had been a stage actor for many years, and I had become a bit of a snob, and I'd just literally kind of forgotten that part of my life. But I do remember, mowing lawns and saving up my allowance and talking somebody's mom into driving us to the Saturday matinee to see a Hammer film, it was all kinds. I could go on and on and on about, the Angry Red Planet and Forbidden Planet. Speaking of the
Sure.
science fiction, but horrors of the Black Museum and the Peter Cushing, Hammer films, along with Christopher Lee and Herbert Lom. I love that stuff. Saturated color. In fact, when you can see the poster over my shoulder, when I did Phantom of the Opera, with Dwight Little and Jill Sholin and Bill Nighy, our sort of blueprint was Dwight and I remembered going to the drive-in movies and seeing the Hammer films, and we love the saturated color and everything. So when we transferred our Phantom of the Opera from the Paris Opera to the London Opera of the same time, we got that sort of double value of it also being the London of Jack the Ripper, So so that's just it's strange. There's so many little circles remaining unbroken in my career, and I a lot of that I'm wise to now because I'm an old fart, and you can look back with hindsight and you can go, oh, 2 and 2 really is 4, and there's why in your life.
It's interesting. You mentioned childhood and sort of seeing some horror sci-fi things when you're a kid. And I think so many people have an experience with this movie, Nightmare on Elm Street. I remember I have 2 older brothers, and they were having a sleepover with friends, and I wanted so badly to hang out with them, but I was the young little whippersnapper or whatever. And they let me come over, and they had rented Nightmare on Elm Street. And I was terrified watching it, but I felt so cool watching it with my older brother and their friends. And I have it sounds crazy to say, it's such a fond memory. I was terrified watching it, but I have such a fond memory of like sort of getting to sneak out with the older kids and hang out with them. And I imagine you must hear stories like that all the time of people when they first see this movie and how it sort of impacted them at that time.
Well, I had made peace with playing Freddy, in my career, and I finally decided I didn't have to protect the characters so much anymore, and I said yes to a kind of cameo performance by Freddy in a popular sitcom on television, The Goldbergs, and in fact, that was my agent's favorite show, and he watched it with his family. But that's exactly that plot. He had the boy Adam Goldberg, the writer, producer, creator of the Goldbergs, and of course there's an actor that plays him in the show. He literally had to go next door to his next door neighbor to see it because his mother, forbade it. And I always think of Nightmare on Elm Street as the theatrical release early on in the franchise, and the lines around the block, all over the world, and audiences screaming. But because I've done so many film festivals and Comic-Cons over the years, I now have had all these stories shared with me from fans, different generations of fans who saw it on either video or on DVD at home. And it was like a family shared experience. Mom and dad would rent Pretty Women. Dad would give the kids a couple of bucks, and they'd go in the horror aisle and come out with Nightmare 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and watch it with mom and dad. And some, pizza getting cold on the coffee table, and one of those Afghan blankets, wrapped around themselves, all scrunched together on the couch. And then at some point, an older brother or an older sister or dad would put steak knives on his hand, scrape the window outside. An older brother, would mess with their heads, or they'd watch it a couple times and then get mom and dad in the living room and pinch them or grab them right when the scary bits came, in the film, because they'd had it. Because we forget, you could pause the tape. You could rewind the tape. You could freeze frame the tape. And so people became more wise to the structure and the genre, but also more familiar with the plot. But I didn't realize this until about, I'm going to say maybe around 2005. I think it was after Freddy versus Jason, and I was at some show, and the fans started, because they had aged and some of their parents had passed away, they started sharing these memories with me of how one of the best memories they had of all things was watching Nightmare on Elm Street with mom and dad and their older brother or older sister or somebody that's maybe passed away or or died overseas or in an accident. And that's the memory they retain, all of them watching it together. I mean, my greatest memory of Wes Craven is not working with him. It's having him over to my cool apartment up by Stanley Park in Vancouver with Jack Holman. And all of us had a little wine to drink, nudge, nudge, wink, say no more. And we were watching SNL, Saturday Night Live, and it was the Dana Garvey, it was the Head Wound Harry sketch.
Okay.
Google it, it's famous. And Wes Craven was laughing and giggling like a little boy until he cried. He literally almost fell off the couch. And he and Jack, it sounds like a stereotype. They were slapping their thighs, and laughing until they couldn't catch their breath.
And it sticks with you.
Is my memory of Wes, because that Wes finally we were all in the man cave together. We were like teenage boys, and he wasn't my boss anymore. He was finally just my friend, my buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a communal viewing experience. And I love the horror genre, especially, I like to go back to things that were in the 80s and 90s and that we've had a little space from. Sometimes the newer stuff, it can hit me a little too hard. But when I know it's something that was produced a little with some time past, it is fun to watch the slashers of the 80s and the 90s. I get a lot of delight watching things like Scream or Nightmare on Elm Street or the Friday the 13th
There's also
movies.
stuff that fell through the cracks, and I'm always, asked what I like, and I like everything. I like everything right up until Apartment 7A, which is on right now, and Longlegs, both of which I saw recently and really was impressed with. But I like to tell people, don't just be contemporary. Don't be afraid to go dig in a little bit. And I tell everybody about Brian De Palma's 1974 Sisters with Margot Kidder and William Finley doing the best Mad Doctor in the history of horror films. But there's such great little things like that, throughout the way. Or you can even go further. I mean, I remember watching all the kids in my neighborhood, we would late in the afternoon on one of the channels they were running for about a week. James Whitmore was starring in it. Black and white, the movie about the giant ants, them. And it has, I think it was up for an Oscar for special effects, but it has that great sound effect for the ants, in the desert. But I just saw it recently and it's really well shot. And the cinematography is really good. And the framing and the composition is wonderful. And it's like we forget, that there's lots and lots and lots of that, it's,
I just rewatched The Fly. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. I just rewatched The Fly recently too with Jeff Goldblum. And I was struck by how still sort of terrifying it is and how great it.
And the original, I saw the original as a child at a movie matinee with my friends. What's that, 1958? So I'm like 10 years old. And I think I spilled my popcorn. Right. I remember the cocooned man at the very end in the spider web going, help me, help me, in a little high voice. And I had nightmares. That terrified me. And Robin Williams used to do an impression of that. And in the original script for Nightmare on Elm Street 7, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, there's actually a scene where I, Robert Englund, playing myself in the movie, have a nightmare about my career being typecast as Freddy Krueger. And I'm in a giant spiderweb cocooned, and a big spider crawls down over me. And the camera reverses and looks up at underneath the spider on his undercarriage, and his belly, instead of having the red belly of the Black Widow spider, it's striped red and green, like your sweater, And
I love it.
That's that circle. I was a child in the original Fly. I know Jeff Goldblum. We did a Charles Bronson movie together, and Jeff, that was like one of his big hits. Right. If not the biggest, except for Jurassic Park, and then to have Wes, kind of process it and digest it through his imagination, and want to put me, without ever knowing that I was a fan of The Fly, either the Jeff Goldblum or the original with Vincent Price, wanting to put me in the spider web and do an homage to The Fly.
That's so cool. That's so
Yeah.
cool. Well, Robert, I mean, I'm obviously wearing this Freddy inspired
Hey,
sweater
I
right
like your
now.
sweater, dude.
Thank you so much. But I'm curious, what's it like to see the imagery of this character you created all those years ago, to see it in haunted houses and in merchandise and toys now? What's that like?
Well, within the world of horror, science fiction, and fantasy illustrators, there are phenomenally, amazingly talented people. And all you have to do is just, go in any bookstore and look at the work in the graphic novels, both United States and Europe. And I see every time I do, a Comic-Con or a film festival, I see the new stuff. I have this theory that during COVID, that a lot of those artists were extra busy because you couldn't do anything. So they did a lot of work. So there's kind of a backlog now, but I'm constantly seeing extraordinary artwork that just standalone artwork. I saw one recently. There's a great one of me on the broomstick, like Wizard of Oz, taken from the image from Nightmare 6. And it's in red and blue, and I'm flying over the Elm Street house with the lights on inside, and it's incredible. The glint in my eye, my gums, this saliva, on my teeth that's picking up the moonlight. It's just incredible. And there's one of my giant eye, and the three little girls are jump roping in front of it. And it's my bloodshot eye going down like a setting sun. Just amazingly beautiful, imaginative work, let alone the action figures. You can see some of them behind me here.
Sure.
And stuff like that, that just keeps multiplying. And I tell you, there's several of all those different subsets of merchandise that I just love. There's some action figures that have perfectly caught my body language in stillness. I don't know how they do that, but it makes you wonder when you see statues, in a museum, if that was a live model, if that artist really captured that human being's perfect. Did somebody model for Michelangelo's David? And did he really just sort of have that cool stance, so that it's just fun, because I'm an old man now, but I still have part of my brain is still, the memory of Robbie Englund, the fanboy. I don't know if you can, well, it's in my other room. I've got my Robbie the robot from Forbidden Planet. I've got a great one, but that movie just blew my mind as a child. And I also am obsessed with the Nautilus, the antique submarine from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Of course, that film, I think that film won Best Oscar over the Ant movie, them.
Oh my gosh.
And because that giant squid was extraordinary.
You're talking to the right guy. I'm in my office right now. I have all sorts of toys here in my office.
Oh, I can see
movie
some
toys.
Yeah.
I sort of put some of the movie ones away to throw a little Halloween in here. But
Hellraiser doll. You put it away.
Yeah. I love I should have. That would have been great. But I've always loved the genre, and so and it must just be so cool, because really the character of Freddy Krueger will be forever now. It's going to be a character that lives on forever and ever and ever. And I am just so fascinated by that. And I'm curious what your take on it, as to why that character, your character, is one, when there's all these movies, there's so many horror films, a lot of them that come and go, some that are really well respected, but it doesn't always have that lasting impact. So in your view, why do you think this character has that hold on pop culture?
Well, I would love to take credit for it, but it's all Wes Craven. It's the hook, the gimmick. It's why it's international. It's why I get to work internationally. The hook, easy way to say it is the nightmare, but you see, the nightmare is common of all humanity, wherever you live, whether you're, on an island in the South Pacific, or you live in deep Alaska wilderness, or Paris, France. We all have nightmares, and many, many people statistically have several of the same ones. Obviously, the drowning dream, the flying dream, the suffocating dream. These are the common ones, but that's also true of some nightmares. And Wes took advantage of that universal knowledge that we all have that, and that universal fact. And by putting it as a plot of a film, because that's what Freddy does, is he preys on your subconscious. Freddy's not walking down an alley behind your house. Freddy's walking down an alley in your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
So it's surreal. It's kicked up. It's a dream landscape. And I acted that. I played that. But I think that violation of one's privacy, it's like Freddy knows what's in all those girls. He knows what's in their diary, because he's in their head. He knows what they're afraid of. He knows who they have a crush on, Johnny Depp. He knows.
The boys did too at the time.
And he can exploit it, and it's terrifying to think somebody can get in there. And you have to stay awake. You can't sleep, because if you do, he'll visit.
Right. It's fascinating. Do you have a favorite outside of the first one? Is there one that you like the most?
The first one's not my favorite, only because, and I think it's the most frightening in a way, but I'm also a director, and I see the budget limitations, and I know the story about when we ran out of money, and I know things we didn't get to do, and how we had to rush. And so my favorite is Nightmare 7, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, because we made that for the fans. It was a salute to the fans. It was about the fans, but it was also about something we were going through, or Wes was going through, examining the morality of our success, exploiting the concept of a dream demon, serial killer. And it really holds up because it's smart, and we made it for you. And we, it was a great experience also because we were all paid very well, because we'd come back. I was back for my 7th or 8th one by then. And then also I got done early every day. I got to take my makeup off around noon or 1. And I'd moisturize, and then I'm an actor. I won't say no to a free meal. So I would go to the catering truck, and I'd sit down, and I'm done acting. So they had a bottle of wine for me on the catering truck, in the ice. So I have a glass of white wine, and I get my free food, and I sit down, and in would wander the late, great John Saxon. And I'd done 3 movies with him by then, and I had traveled a lot with him and done personal appearances and publicity. And I got John to really open up. Maybe he had a short scene he had to shoot at 5:00 in the afternoon or something. And it would be like 2 PM. And, I'd be on my 2nd glass of wine, and he would be telling me stories about Bruce Lee and Elvis Presley and James Dean and dating Natalie Wood and hanging out with Marlon Brando on the Appaloosa and working with young Robert Redford on his first movie, and then getting invited back years later to do Electric Horseman with Redford and Jane Fonda, and working with Clint Eastwood and working with John Huston and making Burt Lancaster angry because he was flirting with Audrey Hepburn on The Unforgiven, and all these stories. Working with Quentin Tarantino on CSI, a special 2-hour episode. And so I got that last second of the golden age of Hollywood, as observed by John Saxon, who was a young, teen idol, but also a regular, normal Hollywood actor. He was starring with Jimmy Stewart and Mr. Hobbs Takes a Vacation and the Appaloosa with Brando and things like that. And so I got that oral history.
Right.
From the horse's mouth, from John. Now, I had worked with Henry Fonda, and I got stories about Broadway from Henry Fonda, and a couple of stories about Hollywood, but mostly about Broadway, because he respected me as a theater actor.
Sure.
And then I'd worked with a couple other people that great, but I just love hearing their observations of everything, and who they thought was the nicest person. And who they thought was a son.
Okay, wait. So who was the nicest person you've worked with, and who was the son of a bitch you worked with?
Well, I've had great fortune, and I've heard horror stories, believe me, about bad casts on sitcoms and hour drama shows and things like that. Not necessarily toward me or to me, but I learned a lot working with and watching Jeff Bridges freshen up a take after take, but yet still being as same as it should be for camera and for marks and everything, but still freshening it and keeping it fresh. So I learned, and that was way back in 75 or
was that Stars Born?
Yeah, Stay Hungry. And
Okay.
but then when I worked with Henry Fonda, I saw him do acts of courtesy with the wonderful actress Eileen Brennan.
Okay.
And in that same film, Susan Sarandon sort of played my funny little leading lady, or I was actually her funny little kind of temporary leading man. And Susan was producing that movie. And on my last callback in the office, waiting to go read, and then I had to go meet Henry Fonda in Bel Air. She sat down and next to me and kissed me on the forehead. And I think that was her way of saying, you've got the part, but you still have to do this reading formality. And let me tell you, that act of courtesy, along with what I saw Henry do for Eileen Brennan and Jeff Bridges, that was my first three or 4 years in movies. And I'd come from the theater, and that gave me so much confidence that by the time I'd done 3 movies or 4 movies, I probably had the maturity of someone that had been doing like maybe 10 or 20 movies, sure, because those people had made me feel comfortable and that I was allowed to be in the room,
Yeah. Yeah. Switching gears a bit, do you ever for Halloween just toss on the costume and scare people? Would you ever do that?
We got in trouble during the making of the first movie, and I had downtime. Some days they wanted me to sleep in the makeup, because they were running out of time, and they didn't want to have to schedule me to put it back on again. But I was killing time one day, and we went out on Sunset Boulevard with some friends, and they had a limo, and they went by some streetwalkers. And they rolled the window down and they asked the streetwalkers what it would cost. We have a friend who'd been injured, overseas. And, he's a veteran, and how much would it cost? And I didn't have the hat on, and I didn't have the sweater on. I think I just had like a military t-shirt, that I'd gotten at a thrift store or something. And I just sort of leaned towards the window and said, I can't remember what I said, but that poor girl, in her what's it called? A washed
Terrified
her that way you wash jeans to make them fade.
Acid
wash, denim miniskirt and high heels. And I scared the bejesus out of that poor girl and ran a block. And then shortly after that, we were getting so sick of the food on the set, with that Teamster mystery meat every day. They have to, it's in their contract, they have to have warm meat.
Sure.
And so a couple of us went across the street. I think Johnny Depp and me and Nick Corey all went across the street, and everybody's used to me in the makeup by now, and I put the hat down, and put a jacket on, and we ran across the street to a Thai restaurant, but we sat in the back, and it was very dark, but there was the fluorescent lights behind the 2 swinging doors to the kitchen. And I took the hat off, and I was facing the kitchen doors, and some guy came out with a tray like this, some Asian grandfather who had probably just immigrated to the United States. And he got one look at me with the fluorescent light just catching me perfect with my KY jelly and my Vaseline on me to make my wounds look like they were suppurating. And he dropped the whole tray. So between the prostitute on Sunset Boulevard and the poor waiter in the Thai restaurant, I learned I have to be real careful going over, because you really can scare somebody. It's like the thing they're not expecting.
But it must have actually felt good in a way to know that the costume and the makeup was working.
Well, yeah. And even as the further into the franchise that we got, I would always have to test it. And sometimes I'd just hang out way in the back of the sound stage in the dark, and I would just wait for some grip to go to the bathroom or something, and or a teamster to move a trailer or a truck or something, and I'd be standing back there, and I'd just sort of come out into the light, and say something really profane to them just to see if I could get them to jump. And yeah, it always worked.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you perfect like the voice and the mannerisms? Were you channeling? Was there a character or something that you were channeling, or how did that sort of come to you?
Well, I'll tell you my influences because they're sort of strange and far apart. One was Nosferatu, starring Klaus Kinski. And I thrust my neck a little like his. And he was bald also, if you remember, the vampire Nosferatu. Wonderful with Isabella Gianni. Wonderful movie. And so that's an influence. And then I had done a TV movie called Mind Over Murder with Bruce Davidson and Deborah Raffin and Andrew Prine, who I worked with on V, and who I was a big fan of from a childhood television show called Stony Burke.
Okay.
And I loved him in that. And I loved him in The Miracle Worker as the brother. He'd done it on Broadway. So I loved Andrew, and I hung out with him a lot when we did V. But he did this, he shaved his head. I think he shaved it. I don't think it was a bald pate, but it looked great. And he played a serial killer on a TV movie I did. Again, that's with Deborah Raffin and Bruce and everybody. And he had a bit of posture to that he used. And I realized that influenced me a lot. And then David Miller, the makeup guy, we were getting close to perfecting the makeup. And I was out deep in the San Fernando Valley at his first little house. David had just worked on Thriller with Michael Jackson. And David had me in his barber chair, and I'm out there, and we're getting real close to what it's going to look like. And I'm looking at myself like I'm looking at the screen now, but I'm equidistant back, and I can watch myself when I watch him. I said, maybe we need it a little darker, David. It's looking a little pink or a little white, and maybe we could put some soot in it, and stuff. But he would poke me with this. He was saving money, and he had these old brushes that he used for the painting, and they would get crusty with the glue. So they're like little arrows, and he got me pretty bad once, and I went, David. Instead of going, David, it was right here. And I saw it in the mirror, and I went, well, I'll try that again. I went, Freddy, I went, sleep kills, just tried a couple of things that worked. It was the right voice. So I used that voice.
I got chills just now
in the movie, but also they put very speed on me to slow me down a little bit. But I was worried because one of my favorite episodes of Twilight Zone is the one with John Doucette and, oh God, who's the wonderful actress that wrote Upstairs, Downstairs, Jean, I'm forgetting her name, beautiful young woman. And she was sort of like hitchhiking across America and got a job on our Twilight Zone in Hollywood. Now she, of course, wrote Upstairs, Downstairs, which became Downton Abbey, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, wow.
But at Jean Smart, no, not Jean Smart, Jean, God, I'm forgetting her name, and I hate
We'll look her up. I'll
let you look at
Well, yeah, we'll look
anyway. So she's an android that's sent to live on an asteroid with a prisoner. Prisoners are put on asteroids in space, and then eventually they're paroled. And so this prisoner's getting paroled, but she's his conjugal android, and like a love doll that we have today, like the love doll. Now I think they're getting robot sex, but anyway, she was his robot sex, and they have to prove to him that he's got to leave her because he's fallen in love with his pretty android. They shoot her face off with their ray guns, and I think the two astronauts were Ted Baxter from the Mary Tyler Moore Show and Clint Eastwood. Anyway, they shoot, or Jock Mahoney from Sally Field's dad, Tarzan. But anyway, they shoot her face off, and now she's laying in the dust on the surface of the android, and the ship's getting ready to leave, and he's got to leave, and he's going to go down to kiss her, but now he sees all the coils and the wires and stuff, and she goes, I love you, Corey. And that was a very speed technique that they used. So I was worried that Freddy would sound like that. So in the first one or two movies, I talk fast, as you've noticed. I didn't slow myself down and speak like an actor because I knew it would sound too slow. So I could say, welcome to prime time, bitch. And it comes out, welcome to prime time, bitch. It comes out just perfect with the very speed on it. And it gave me a little bit of bass notes, which were nice. that
I love
normally I
that.
can only do if I'm doing voiceover work because I can find that voice. But when you're on the set, you're more emotional, and it's trickier to launch that.
I know you've said recently that you're done playing Freddy, but maybe there could be a chance that if there was an animated thing, you would love to do a voice.
Oh
And
yeah.
so has there been any talk of that? Is that a possibility?
Well, that's my bread and butter now. I've got a couple of new shows out right now, Dragons, Blood, and Curses on Apple TV Plus. And it's fun. You can see me. I'm just like, this is who I really am. I'm, just an old surfer, and it's great because I can just show up in my pajamas, not worry about my bald spot or combing my hair or anything.
But how
And,
do we get Freddy animated? I think that
well,
would be
no, what I'm
incredible.
saying is Freddy's ripe for animation, and he's been in a couple of games and really beautifully depicted, and he's been illustrated by some really talented people in a kind of graphic novel cartoonesque way, which I think would really lend itself to an animated show. And yeah, I would certainly say yes to that because I can still do the voice, and I would also caution them not to have him talk too much. I mean, he can talk and he can have his occasional joke, and the Freddy laugh, but I wouldn't want him to be overwritten. But yeah, that would be fun to do, and maybe maybe it's time for that. I don't know. It would have to be the right artist, to really capture that, because you have to give it that kind of noir darkness.
Right.
Horror doesn't work in the daytime, is a Hollywood saying.
It's interesting talking about sort of scaling the character back. I just saw the new Beetlejuice movie, and I was fascinated by how Michael Keaton had said he wants to have the same amount of screen time. Don't give him more screen time in the sequel, because he said Beetlejuice works better if he's sort of limited. And I think that's a fascinating case too, even maybe for Freddy or some of the villains. Sometimes it works better when they're
we probably, and we did it on purpose because we were addressing the culture at that time, the popular culture at that time. But when we did part 6, Freddy's Dead, we may have jumped the shark a bit,
Right.
But it was intentional, and there's a lot of great stuff in that film that I wouldn't trade anything for. But Freddy was a little too busy in that film because it sort of had him. If you have too many kids that Freddy has to revenge, then he's there too much.
Mm-hmm.
It's better when he maybe goes after 2 or 3 of them, and you talk about him a little bit, or you see consequences of what's happened with the first ones he's dealt with.
Yeah. Well, Robert, I know I have to let you go. I would just wonder, what do you want your legacy to be, whether it be with this character or just your work in general? I'm curious.
Oh, look, I just want people. I'm a veteran. I'm an old veteran character actor, and I'm the luckiest son of a gun on the block, because Freddy didn't hurt me. The timing was great. It blossomed into a wonderful experience. I've met so many terrific people over the years: Yaphet Kotto and Rachel Talalay and Chuck Russell and Wes Craven, Jack Shoulder. Just these Stephen Hopkins, wonderful people, and all my leading ladies: Lisa Wilcox and, of course, Heather Langenkamp, and Billy Zane's sister, Lisa Zane, wonderful actress, Monica Keena, Kim Myers, Mark Patton, and all the people behind the camera and the writers, Brian Hegeland, and some of these people have Oscars now. So makeup guys, it was just this great
team
adjunct second act of my life. And I came out of the makeup, and I had aged. I was older, and I went into doing my, I went where I was asked. That became my rule. I go where I'm asked. And I did a lot of low budget horror, but I'm sort of falling into that kind of, I'm now the guy that does the backstory. I'm the old priest, or I'm the guy that runs the old country store, that warns them about the woods, or I'm the old doctor that knows the backstory of something. And I love those parts. And I get lots of kind of wonderful arias, monologues and things, which I know how to do. And so I'm getting some screen time. Had I just remained the sidekick and the best friend, which I would have aged out of much earlier, because back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, young leading men could have an older mentor sidekick, like Arthur O'Connell or Walter Brennan or somebody. But that's not the way it is now. leading men have a younger sidekick, that looks up to them and refracts in their glory. And so I would, if I had not done Freddy, I would have probably hit a dead end sooner. But I'm busy with voiceovers, and I've had to turn down 4 movies this year because I'm committed to doing the 40th anniversary tour. And but I'll say yes next year. And I like it. Let me tell you what, acting is such a great gig. We put on other people's clothes and we say other people's words, and they pay us. It's great. It's not working. It's fun. I think somehow actors, they used to call us players, the players present, tonight's players are, and players, I thought of this a couple of years ago, play. We're the people. Society has said, well, when you were a kid, you were fun to hang out with, to play with. We're going to let you keep playing your whole life. And I think that's sort of what actors are. I mean, we're storytellers, but we also just get to play, Remember when you were a kid, there was always somebody on your block that was the most fun, or he had the coolest bedroom, or he knew how to help you fix your bike, or his parents had the first pool in the neighborhood, and you'd always go over there and play, and you would play whatever it was. And you'd drink Kool-Aid and you'd play Monopoly and all that kind of stuff. And you'd be out in the street until your parents called you in the evening in the summer. And I think that's sort of kind of who we are. We're just never, we kept that kid inside us alive. And I feel I know Wes Craven did. And I hope that sometimes I still tap into little Robbie Englund and his wonderment.
I love that. You get to keep playing. Well, Robert, such a pleasure talking to you. As you said, the anniversary of Nightmare on Elm Street, it's on 4K Ultra HD now.
Can I say one more thing? Do you have a second?
Oh, I have.
Yeah. I am pushing the Ultra 4K because a week ago, I had my wife's family down, and it was Sunday, and I didn't know how to entertain them anymore. I'd taken them out to dinner, blah, blah. So I made root beer floats, and we all went in the living room, and I had a couple of people in their 60s and a couple of people in their 20s. I'm thinking, what do I do here? And I'm the oldest guy there, but I'm pretty easy. So I downloaded, I streamed the 4K of Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece. And I saw the original with my parents. I've seen it several times on TV. I've probably seen it once or twice on video, and it's never looked better. It's incredible because you're a voyeur, you're a peeping Tom, and you're looking in that building across the way, and every color, everything in deep focus in that set, that incredible set, you can see it's crisp and clear, and the color's been digitally corrected. So all the fans that only experienced the original Nightmare on video, check this out.
It's also unrated for the first time on digital. And you mentioned visuals, but sound-wise, I just watched this disc version. Yeah. I'm a big fan of physical media, and the sound of it is fantastic.
And there's 8 extra seconds of Tina on the ceiling. Go, Amanda Wiss.
Robert, can I get you to say just Happy Halloween from Everything Iconic and Freddy Krueger as Freddy?
All right. Robert Englund here, a.k.a. Freddy Krueger, and I'm just saying trick or treat and happy Halloween, Everything Iconic.
What a dream. I love you so much, Robert. Everyone's going to pick this up. Last question I ask all of my guests, and this might be a strange question for you, but do you or Freddie, this is the most bizarre thing to ask you, but do you or Freddie have a favorite Mariah Carey song?
No, neither of us, I'm afraid. Okay. All right.
That works. All right. Thank you so much, Robert. Take care.
I've recently fallen in love with Ariana Grande.
Oh, incredible. She's amazing.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert.